Alrighty, so today I'm going to be reviewing the first wave of Planetary Qualifiers that we got. We had 7 tournaments. I'm going to be reviewing 6 of them today because I do not have the results yet for the one that happened in California on October 6th. But we're going to do a deep dive into what happened in the other 6 tournaments, talk about the winning decks, talk about the meta, talk about what we got to do going forward. Before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. It helps out a ton. Go check out my Patreon if you haven't already and looking for some more content from me. All right, so the goals of this are going to be, first of all, review the results. I'm going to go one by one through the tournaments, check out the top 8s. That's really what I'm going to focus on, see what made it. These were larger tournaments than not the largest we've had in terms of sheer number, but certainly largest in terms of what they were worth. A first place here is giving you a day 1 buy at the Worlds event that's going to be happening in June, I believe, which means you do not have to play the first day of that tournament. You just automatically qualify for the second day. On top of that, FFG had said that they were going to do something special for all the people that got that win and get that buy on that first day. So pretty major payout, especially. You add in whatever the store is giving you, the first place champions mat, all the promos and stuff like that. It was big. There's a lot going on. So yeah, we're going to review the results from all those tournaments and the top 8s. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the meta and what it looks like, and then what we might need to do to adapt. Finally, I'm going to recap my own PQ result. So I played in the New Jersey one at Red Seal Gaming. So I'm going to show off my deck, talk about my results, and how my tournament went. So let's get going. So the PQs, we had Dallas, Kansas City, Madrid in Spain, Manawan, New Jersey, Colorado Springs, Edmonton, Canada, and then one California, which I'm not going to talk about, which happened on Sunday. All right. So, before we get to this, the major takeaways, I'm going to shoot over to this spreadsheet. Now, this was shared with me, my pals, the KTOD group. So, big shout out to them for this helps a ton. I didn't have to do nearly as much digging into this, into the results and stuff. Also, they're going to be doing a recap of their own, so I encourage you to check that out as well, get some more information. So let's go over this. So this one that you're seeing here is the Dallas PQ. So the top 8 was a Boba Green, a Sabine ECL, Kira ECL, Young Han Blue, Old Han Yellow, another Sabine ECL, a Boba Yellow, and a Sabine Yellow. This was the top 8. What ended up winning in the finals was the Boba Green, which was the number 1 seed, defeated a Sabine ECL. And, this is chalk meta, right? The only weird deck here is the Sabine Yellow. The other stuff, got Boba Green and Yellow. You got some Sabines, Akira, one of each Han. This is the gauntlet, right? This is every deck that you'd expect at the top mostly. Kind of got here, and this is the deck list that won the Boba Green. You can see here, this looks similar to other Boba Green stuff. These decks are certainly going bigger than the mono yellow stuff. They go into Maul Vader, usually playing a bunch of them. This one is also playing Reinforcement Walker. That one is not in all the Boba Green stuff, but the deck relies a lot on an early game McClunky with its early underworld units to kind of help fend off against Sabine. Bazine is a really important piece as well. The underworld stuff is really good. It helps protect Boba. And you see here the 3 Boba Fett's armor. We're going to see a lot of Boba Green, so a lot of these decks are going to be pretty similar, but they do run heavy amounts of Boba armor, which can invalidate a lot of things trying to compete with them. So, Bazine definitely helps protect, set that up. Barrage, this is what the green's all about. It's ramp, barrage, Vader, Maul, and then you're still playing the most overstated leader in the game. So Boba Green's been doing well, but it really came out during these PQs. We're going to see a few first place boba green finishes, so definitely something I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the like recap portion. But the decks are all pretty similar. They are focusing on ramp, they're focusing on Vader Maul stuff. McClunky is huge with the early game 1-drops. And, you know, Boba's armor, which, you know, the mono yellow decks are playing as well. This deck, something I don't like, a choice a lot of these decks made is whether or not they want to be playing No Good To Me Dead in the main deck versus Waylay. This one opted for the No Good To Me and had the Waylays in the sideboard. Palp's Return and Choose Sides are both like grindy sideboard cards that a lot of these decks are playing, sometimes in different numbers. This one also opted for Devastator, not one that I see very often. But, you know, first place finish, that's pretty awesome. Let's look at Kansas City. So top 8 here was Boba Yellow, Boba Green, and then another Boba Green, but this time it was with the ECL base. Then a Boba Tarkin Town, so we had a Boba Red there. So 5 Bobas, 3 of them are green. 2 Young Hans, 1 blue, 1 green, and then a Sabine ECL. And lo and behold, Boba Green wins again, and it beat the Hantu Blue. Now, I don't have the list here, but once again, lots of Boba. A couple other meta stuff like the Sabine, the Hantu Blue. I say Hantu ECL is not super popular, but has done well, especially in some Polish events I've seen. Boba Tarkentown really being kind of the wild card here. Not a deck you see very often, but still Boba, still strong. So again, there's not a ton of new stuff. It seems to be like one rogue deck in each of these events, and then mostly things that have been consistently doing well. All right, Spain. We have top 16 listed here, but of course, top 8 is what we're looking at. Boba Yellow, Palp Blue, Cassian Tarkentown, Han Yellow, Palp Yellow, Boba Yellow. So this one is probably the most different from most of the events. There are 3 Boba Yellows still here. There's a Han Yellow, so that's all solid. But there are 3 Palps here. 2 Palp Yellows and a Palp Blue. You don't see Palps usually creep up to the top, especially not in this number. So my expectation is there probably wasn't a lot of Sabine present at this event, so these Palps were able to like last longer into the event. Cassian Tarkentown being completely wild. I'm definitely going to open that one just because I have no idea what it's playing. But the final list was Joe Javi right here, so the Palp Yellow. So I'm going to open the finalist deck. Palp Yellow, interestingly enough, does a lot of similar things around the Boba Green, right? It's playing an early Underworld package, although it's not playing McClunky, which, you know, I probably would because I think that's like the best start you can have into Sabine. But a lot of officials, including Scanning Officer, which is a very powerful card into the mono yellow Han deck right now. So if you're trying to target that deck, Scanning Officer, regardless of what you're playing, can be a huge get for you. A lot of Sentinels, you know, it's playing Ramp, it's playing big stuff, and it's playing Palp. And Change of Heart with Palp is pretty strong. Overall, this deck it's a greedy deck. Palp is always greedy. It's very difficult to beat Sabines with this deck. It's sometimes even difficult to beat aggressive Bobas like mono Bobas, but it can certainly grind very well with decks trying to go longer. And pretty cool to see something a little different from the general decks that are winning a ton of events. I am, like I said, going to open up this Cassian Tarkentown because... Oh, that's not Cassian. That's Cad Bane. Okay, so it's Cad Bane Tarkentown, which, you know, makes more sense to me. It's also a little bit of a rogue deck, but certainly one that I've actually liked playing a lot. Have a video about it. This list is playing, you know, everything Underworld, which is really good. Tarkentown helps it get early board advantage, and it's really good. Like McClunky's awesome in this deck. Jabba's really good in this deck. I like playing even more Jabbas. Sneak Attack Ruthless Raider is a very strong finishing combo. So cool to see that this event had some more unique stuff. So this is the Jersey PQ. This is actually the one that I participated in. So as you can see right here, I did make the top 8. I actually finished 4th in this event, but I'll give a full breakdown later. We had a boba green, a boba yellow, and then a boba green, and then a boba blue. So that's 4 bobas. This time the unique one was the blue one, not a red one. 2 Sabine ECLs, a Kira ECL, and a Han yellow. So another event chock full of meta stuff. The top 4, in the top 8, I did actually, I beat a boba, the yellow, and then in the top 4, I lost to a boba green, who then went on to win the entire tournament. So here's another boba green winner. Going to see how different. It was not this one. That was the first seed, but it wasn't the first seed that won. It was the 3rd seed that ended up winning. So this was the winning players boba green. So as you can see, it's still the 1-drop McClunky stuff. It's still the full ramp package. It's still a lot of giant finishers, no reinforcement walkers as we saw in the other deck. 3 bobas armor. This deck was playing syndicate lackeys as like the other 5. We see Bosk in that spot pretty frequently as well. The sideboard here was 3 choose sides, 1 Palps return, so we talked about that. He also opted for the Waylays main and the No Good To Me Deads in the sideboard. But the general deck list it's a very similar strategy with some small card choice differences, but it plays very well. I lost to this deck in a best of 3. We got to game 3. Could not close it out, unfortunately, for myself. Fortunately for Austin here. But he did take down this tournament, and that's a really big win. Alrighty, let's look at Colorado. So I only have the winning players list, but that's the important one, I guess. We had in this place, in Colorado, Han 2 blue, actually 2 of them, and a mono blue Iden, a Ray Tarkentown, a Sabine ECL, a Han 2 ECL, and 2 Kira ECLs. So a couple of different things, right? Iden blue is not a deck we see very often. Ray Tarkentown is like, it floats around there. It's not usually highly represented, but has been around. Other than that, more meta stuff. No bobas in this top 8. So, there were like 4 or 5 in quite a few of these tournaments in the top 8, but this one, no boba. The final was an Iden beating one of the Kira ECLs. This is the mono blue Iden deck. It's got some not mono blue cards in it, playing some Bazines in the main deck and a couple Crate Dragons. But other than that, mono blue. This is not your typical like full event mono blue control. There are 21 units in this deck. A lot of them are more they're defensive units, right? I mean, Pershing is a draw engine, Klein is a healer. Charlton, we know, even like the no unit decks play Charlton. Lone Pike, just a value card. A couple Bendus, which is super interesting. Don't see this card in very many winning decks. 3 Snokes, 2 Crate Dragons, 3 Avengers. So it looks like the main game plan here is not to mill out your opponent with Vigilance. It is to play a game where you defeat them with actual cards. But they do play 3 Entrenched, likely as a removal, a couple top targets, the full suite, a Super Laser Blast, 2 Rival's Fall, and 2 Vanquish. No Fell to Dragons, interestingly enough. So Vanquish is kind of in that slot. They didn't opt for the cheaper Fell. They wanted to just be able to kill anything. 3 Vigilance. This is just all the removal. Restocks main deck, a couple of them. So it looks like they're also prepped main board for like the grindy mirrors. Like if you're looking at like Bosk Blue and stuff like that. So because they have Bazines in the main deck to try to snipe restocks out of their opponent hand potentially. And they have 2 restocks. So they have insurance on if one of them gets discarded by their opponent's Vigilance. But this is definitely different. I'd say we have seen hard control be meta. It was mostly with Bosk Blue. This is another take on that. This is a very similar deck, just it is playing more units. It does look like it's a little more interested in winning with units a little quicker, but overall it still has that very like removal focused 1-for-1 trading all game package. All right, Pasadena we don't have, and Edmonton was an incomplete list, but we did get the winner, which was Han 1 defeating Boba. So Han 1 green, actually not a mono yellow, won this. We did see a Boba yellow was here, a Bosky CL, a mono blue Ray, a Garth Saxon, and a Sabini CL. So some meta, some not, right? Like Mono Blue Ray, I like that deck a lot, actually. Not usually one that's highly represented. Gar Saxon is certainly not. Bosk ECL, you don't see that too often. So, and even like the Green Han, a very popular deck from set 1, not so popular recently. But I don't have lists for this right now. But this definitely, like, we had a couple of these 2 events here in the 6, Edmonton and the Spanish one in Madrid, that had a little more decks that were not what I would say are like meta or like gauntlet decks, but most of the other ones were very high focus of things like Boba specifically, and then a lot of Sabine, a lot of Han2 Blue, Kira's were pretty present, Mono Yellow Han was pretty present, and I'd say those were some of the most popular stuff. So stats here, we don't have Edmonton because it wasn't a full result, or the California one, but the rest, if you want to look at like top 8s, we had 10 Boba Greens, 4 Boba Yellows, actually it's like 11 Boba Greens because one of them was playing ECL, and then a Boba Blue and a Tarkin Town. So that is how many Bobas? 17 of 40. It's almost 50%. Then we had 7 Sabine ECLs. We had 2 Kira ECL and 3 Kira 30s. So that's 5 Kiras. And then Han 2, 4 in blue and 2 in ECL. So like 6 Han 2s split in a couple colors. Han Yellow, only 2. We know the Han Green did win one of these events. It's listed as 0 here because it was the Edmonton one, which is not a full list yet. And then, you know, some rogue stuff. But it's a ton of Boba, like a metric ton of Boba, specifically Boba Green. And then a lot of Sabine, a decent amount of Kira and Han 2, and a little, and way less, basically everything else. A couple Han 1 Yellows. All right, so we're done with that part. Now, takeaways. So, Boba Green. So, this deck had a coming out party here. Won 3 events, I believe, and was also present. We saw 11 Boba Greens in these top 8s, something around that number. So, that's pretty massive. What are we going to do? Do we want to overreact? Where do we want to go from here? What targets this deck? So Boba Green and Boba's armor are something you want to consider. For instance, if you're playing Sabine, you really need to be ready to Poe their Boba, because Poe can actually ECL and kill Boba through that armor by blowing up the armor first and then dealing 2 damage to the Boba after. That's important. Maybe even be able to find that Poe more easily with something like R2 could be useful, but you'd have to play that card, right? So Sabine has the outs. It might not be as clean of a win for Sabine as it used to be, because 30 health, the McClunky Underworld package is pretty good in that early game. Of course, Barrage is a very good card into Sabine. So Sabine can definitely win. I don't think Sabine is like major dog here, but there might be some minor tweaks you want to do there. What about Kira? So I lost to this deck. I don't want to overreact to me losing. You're going to ask, I know, rivals fall. Maybe. We can talk about that when we do my own recap. Other than that, usual suspects. So we talked about the other things that are around. It's Sabine. It's Kira. We got Han 2, mostly in blue. Han Yellow. These are pretty common things. And there's not much room. Like, we saw some rogue decks, but it seems like we've really solidified this meta game, and we need to see now that we have like these major events. Not like this is the time that people are going to start looking at these decks and playing these decks. How do we target these decks now? Is there something else waiting in the wings? Is it Palpatine, for instance? Like that, there was one event where that did very well. Is that going to be something that we can target with? Yeah. So like, where do we go? We gotta either take our established archetypes and then tweak them so we can better combat what was doing well. So like Boba Green is the #1 priority that we gotta be ready for. How can we mess with that deck a little more than we used to? Past that, we still have to be very ready for Sabine. It's going nowhere. So there is a lot of things to consider, and I'll be over the next couple weeks be testing myself and like trying to get ahead of what is the current meta game. So stay tuned for more content. Certainly check out my Patreon, which is where all my deck lists are constantly being updated live. So if you're interested in more of what like my internal testing is, that's a good way to get some extra points and like follow my process more specifically. But of course, I'll also be doing more videos here on the YouTube channel, so stay tuned there. All right, my recap. So I finished 4th at the Red Seal Gaming. It was 99 players. I was on Kira ECL. I'll show you the list in a moment. I went 5-2 in the Swiss portion. I started off 4-0. I beat a Mono Yellow Han, a Sabine ECL, a Boba Yellow, and a Young Han Blue. So that's like, I played like the full gauntlet except for the Boba Green. But then I also lost to a Mono Yellow Han, and then I also lost to a Boba Yellow. And then finally, I was able to beat a Green Luke, and I was one of 2 5-2s that made it in. My tiebreakers were very, very high because I don't think any of my opponents other than one finished worse than 5-2. So I just had a very powerful tiebreaker. So yeah, I beat the Mono Yellow Boba that beat me in the Swiss in the top 8. Strong player. He definitely made me work for this for that win. We ended up being 3-3 on the day. It just so happened that I won the 2 games that were in the top 8. And then I lost to the eventual winner, the Boba Green deck that we saw. So let's bring up my list, and then we can talk a little bit about what I liked and didn't. So I played a pretty greedy Kira ECL. You can see my top end, 3 Vaders, 2 Mauls, 2 Walkers, a Snoke, 2 Avenger, Relentless, and Devastator. It's a lot. I was basically trying to prep for as much as ever I could that wasn't Sabine. Like, I, of course, make some concessions there, and definitely some in the sideboard, but I wanted to be pretty strong everywhere else. You can see I have 3 Pershings in the main deck, 3 Inferno Force, and 3 Pikes. I don't have any other early plays like the Hylobon Enforcers, which tend to be pretty strong into Sabine. They were gone. I even caught a Death Trooper. That was a concession that I added an extra Maul, so I had like that extra 7 drop that dealt 7, so I didn't need that 7 damage play from the Vader nearly as often. So I was like, 1 Death Trooper becomes 1 Maul. I brought in takedowns, which were notably pretty absent from my list recently because of the uprising in Mono Yellow Han. I expected that deck to be pretty prominent. I ended up playing it twice, and takedown is just an important card against Millennium Falcon. It's really a way they can try to cheese you out of games. It also, kills all their X5s like Tech, DJ, Kira. So takedown, I thought, just was going to be better than it's been in the past. All right. So what went wrong? I'd say I still don't think, like, I lost to a Boba Green, so the question is, do I react to that? Do I need to make significant changes? I also lost to a Mono Yellow Han. I split there. I felt like I already made changes for that matchup, so I felt pretty decent there. Like, not going to call it favored or unfavored. I won 3 games and lost 2 to the deck on the day. The pilot that played both pilots were very seasoned with that deck, so I think I got like a pretty good experience of playing into it. I do not feel like I need to make that many concessions, but something I do think might need to happen is a little difference in the early game. One thing that really stood out to me in that Boba Green matchup is that I did not have clean ways to kill their Bazines and Salacious Crumbs, even like Greedo sometimes. And that made my Power of the Dark Sides way worse. So I used to have 3 Hylobon Enforcers in this deck, which was certainly better into early plays that these decks were playing. It's also better into something like Sabine, and sometimes it's decent into something like Mono Yellow Boba when they play Bodies, right? And you can one-shot them with your Hylobon Enforcers. But specifically into this deck playing kind of a weak early game. Like, Boba Green's first couple turns are not particularly intimidating. They barely have space. It's just 7th Fleet Defender and Fire Spray. Most of them don't run any other space. So that early, being able to clear those early units really helps you later in the game with them having less action economy, which means they might have to like play into something without being able to stall actions. It makes your barrages a little cleaner, not having much things to clean up. It makes, of course, your power of the dark side's much better, which is a major point into playing against Boba's armor. Other ways that you need to mitigate that, you can ask, is it time for Rivals Fall? And it might be. I'm not particularly high on the card, and I think it might be a trap to include it because it might just mean that instead of losing earlier, you just lose in 4 turns, but you still lose, because I think it's such a tempo negative play. If they get a good Boba's armor off and are able to play a turn with that, and then the next turn you have to Rivals Fall their Boba, you're probably so far behind at this point, and then you're just going to potentially lose into like a Fire Spray Vader Maul curve, because you had to kind of like waste that mid game answering the Boba. And I really want to be able to answer the Boba in a different way. And takedowns can help in that math a little bit. It's not always clean because, like, if you Kira flip into a Boba and then they Boba's armor, it actually has 6 health. You really need to like, it's tough too because of barrage. I've always thought the green Boba was harder than playing into mono yellow Boba, and maybe that's not what you expect because mono yellow plays more discard, like Bodhi and Cunning potentially. But I thought them being able to ramp, which means they get to match your Kira turn and potentially flip before you even flip Kira, and have themselves protected from a Power of the Dark Side with one of their little units, means that even if you flip and then they barrage you down and they just delete your board, you can be in a world of hurt there. So yeah, that can be a problem. Boba Green, in my opinion, is a harder matchup than Boba Yellow, but it is not an unbeatable matchup. There are definitely more concessions we can make. Like I said, the early game can use a boost here, and maybe one Rivals Fall as like a cheeky out. I think being able to play Super Laser Blast post board is something I do bring in here, because if you get past that mid game of the Boba, they're really good once like the dust settles and then they're trying to chain things like Vader Maul, and we just want to be able to clean up and then get to our capital ships. So Super Laser Blast post board is what I usually prefer to Rivals Fall, but I am open to the idea that we might need a little more help. My first vote is, let's make their early game so much worse that it's harder for them to like get value off of a Boba's armor play, and that's with potentially adding the Hylobon Enforcers back, maybe Viper Probe Droid, maybe Gamorrean Retainers, like a 3-2 for 2 just to have in play. They're all options. Of course, Hylobon Enforcer was a card I was very high on early, so it seems like it can definitely slot back in. I don't want to play too many early drops because I liked how a lot of this played into a lot of different decks, specifically like all the Hans. I felt like I had a pretty robust plan into there, but I can certainly see trimming some of the top end here. There is a lot, and the Reinforcement Walkers actually happen to underperform pretty majorly. The only matchup they were very good in for me was against the Han Blue. So I can definitely see having a couple extra slots there with the Reinforcement Walkers, and then go from there. Gideon was an absolute all-star for me. It was a major player into beating Boba's too, because I think what Gideon does for them is like make them have to answer you, which is a great place to be as the control deck. If you're able to like Gideon kill a unit, get an experience, and you are now just a threat to them, and they have to either spend a turn waylaying it, which is like the worst that it can be for you, but it still mostly means they're not advancing their own board, or if they have to like ambush something like a Forlom or a Syndicate Lackeys into it, or a Bosk, whatever it might be. This is true for Boba Yellow and Boba Green. So Gideon was fantastic. I really like him with ECL. Of course, there are champions for the 30 HP, which is also a consideration. That build, because it doesn't have ECL, usually plays less of things like Long Pike and Gideon, and then plays something like Lieutenant Charlton, who doesn't need ECL to have that immediate impact. Although you can play Charlton with ECL as well. That is also an option. You just need to be pushing your deck into a more blue-focused build because you need him to be online more. But that might be more possible, especially now that I'm thinking about trimming stuff like Reinforcement Walker again, which was not in my deck that I took down at Gen Con. So there is potential to trim some more of this green. And of course the black zones, which are also not blue. But overall, I was happy with my deck choice. I was where I needed to be. I was playing a Boba, a matchup that at the very least I felt comfortable in. I'm never going to tell you that I think I should be smashing all Bobas. I think maybe earlier on in the meta, before the Bobas really adapted to the prevalence of Kira, it was an easier matchup, but they are certainly aware now of what's happening with Kira and how, and they come prepared with whatever it is. The Boba greens, they know how to kind of like match your flip turn. The Boba yellows, even the one that beat me, was just packing their shoot first, so that like they'd flip, I'd flip, they'd shoot first my Kira with their Boba. They would be blocking a big barrage in that case, and then for instance Boba's armoring afterwards, and that can work. So there is combinations, right? And Boba's armor is a very powerful card. It's not just against Kira. It's just something I think a lot of decks need to now be more prepared for. Another way I was thinking that you can target, and this has nothing to do with Kira right now, another way that I was thinking we can target Boba Green, for instance, is with hard control. I think the unitless hard control decks, first of all, make Boba's escalation much more difficult. They don't get to play with resources nearly as much. On top of that, those decks will pack things like Entrenched. You just shut down the Boba forever. You're never going to play anything on the ground until you Super Laser Blast anyway. So that is pretty strong. I think that hard control stuff, it's usually going to also play Rivals Fall. It's going to be playing Fell of the Dragons for the fire sprays. And it is just going to go really long, and just like the Super Laser Blasts are going to really be the reset. I think those decks can grind pretty well with Boba, because Boba Green is not a particularly aggressive deck in the first few turns, which gives these, for instance, these like Bosk blue decks or the Mono Blue Iden that we saw, more time to just get ready and just prevent themselves from taking too much damage until they can get to their Super Laser Blast stuff and really just kind of take over the game. So hard control, definitely something I'd look at targeting Boba. You just have to make sure that your matchup into Sabine isn't getting punted, because that is the other barrier here. So we've got Boba on a huge uprise, right? Boba Green specifically, but Boba Yellow also still very prevalent and does not play the same way as Boba Green. So those two decks you need to be ready for. And then of course Sabine. So like between those three decks, you are talking like 40% of the field, maybe even more sometimes, especially at top tables. Like I can tell you, once I was in like that 4-0 bracket, then the 4-1 bracket, I would look around and it was just like Bobas for days, some Sabines in there, and then like the smattering of like Kira or Han, but like Boba up here, Sabine here, and then like that other stuff. So the more you're winning, the more you're playing these decks, which means the more you have to be ready. It's a good idea that if you're preparing for a tournament like this, play and build your deck to be good at the top tables. You can't account for everything you're going to see at the lower tables. As you can see anecdotally from my list, I cut Super Laser Blast from the main deck. I loved having that when I expected Palps and stuff, and like Vader. That's like where I wanted the main deck Super Laser Blast, really. But I told myself, you know what? I am playing to try to get to this top 8 and be good in that top 8. And Super Laser Blast is a catch-all, and it's something I like to bring in some matchups, like against Boba Green or like Han Blue, but it's not a requirement in a lot of matchups, except like Palpatine. And you know what? I don't think I'm going to play a Palpatine, because I plan on winning the first few rounds, and I don't think I'll see a lot of them around me. And you know, that gamble paid off for me, because I saw no Palps anywhere near the top tables where I was playing. Now, if you were in Spain, there were going to be Palps all over you, so you have to be cognizant of like the meta around you as well, to the best that you can be. But I always say it's a good idea to prep for what you expect to be winning, not just what you expect to be present, because after you get past those first few rounds, you are going to be in that winner's bracket, and it really doesn't matter much if you're not in the winner's bracket anymore, right? If you're like 1 and 2, you know, it happens. It's going to happen to me. It happens to good players all the time. Like, that's okay. But you have to plan for the events where you're like in the 3-0 bracket and like the 4-0, because that's when the competition gets even stiffer, and that's when you see the most tuned decks. And those are where you want to prep your main deck. So I hope this train of thought wasn't all over the place, because I know I jumped around a lot in what I was saying, but Boba Green, whoa, we have to be ready for that. That is going to be everywhere in the next PQ, I imagine. So start practicing against it now. That deck it's not like a wildly new deck. It's just going to be way more present. I don't think it's unbeatable. I think there's already decks in the meta that I think can compete with it. Even like Boba Yellow, Mono Yellow Boba, the Kira decks, Sabine can compete with it, right? It's not auto winning all of this. It's just had a very, very, like an absurdly good weekend. So it's gonna be played a lot more. That's just what happens, right? So be ready. All right. I hope this was helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments. And yeah, hit that subscribe button, check out the Patreon, all that good stuff. And until next time, take care.